Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose of Amonkhet spoilers. So today we don't have a ton of cards in number. I think we have like 5 cards, but we get some super spicy ones, lots of rares, and even a mythic. So let's jump right into it and start off with Unesh Sphinx Sovereign. So this card is super interesting. The blue mythic, or one of the blue mythics from the set. 6 mana, you get a 4/4 flyer. It reduces the cost of your Sphinx spells by 2, which is pretty huge because Sphinx are super expensive. And then you get a mini Factor Fiction, a 4-card Factor Fiction when it enters the battlefield. So as soon as I saw Unesh, the first thing I thought of was Sphinx of Ithun, which is kind of similar. Sphinx of Ithun, a little more expensive, little bigger body, but comes with the same Factor Fiction attached, except Sphinx of Ithun has a real Factor Fiction, 5 cards instead of 4. And if you weren't playing Standard back when M12 was in the format, Sphinx of Ithun did see a little bit of fringe play, mostly in Heartless Summoning decks if I remember right. So there is some history of an effect like Unesh Sphinx Sovereign seeing play in Standard. I think there's a big challenge though, and that is in Standard at 6 mana in control decks, which is where Unesh would most likely fit. We already have Torrential Gearhulk, and Torrential Gearhulk comes with a bigger body. It has Flash, which lets you get around counters, does some other tricks, and you can usually fetch back a Glimmer of Genius or something, which Scry True Draw 2 is probably going to net you about the same amount of card advantage as you will with Unesh and the Factor Fiction ability. So is there really a chance that Unesh will unseat Torrential Gearhulk? It seems a little unlikely, especially since it's legendary. That said, it could be like a one-of finisher alongside Torrential Gearhulk. I kinda doubt it, but you never know. It could show up. On the other hand, we could just go full-on Sphinx Tribal. The big problem with Sphinx Tribal is all the Sphinx are super expensive. So even though their cost is reduced by 2, starting presumably on turn 6, and we can cast our Sphinx of the Final Word for 5 mana, and Curator of Mysteries for 2 mana, and Glyphkeeper for 3 mana, they're just so expensive to start out with. It's hard to imagine that you can stay alive well enough in the early game to really pull off this plan, but maybe with a bunch of counter spells, maybe Engulf the Shore, it might be possible to be mono blue Sphinx, just get up to Unesh, and then use that mana reduction ability to cast a bunch of really big flyers and just win the game quickly after bouncing everything and gaining control. Most importantly, Unesh immediately becomes the #1 commander if you want to be mono blue Sphinx. The only other mono blue Sphinx option, and there are some multicolor options, but the only other mono blue Sphinx option is Alhamra High Arbiter, and Unesh is about 100 times better than Big Ale. It just generates card advantage, it works more efficiently with your other Sphinx creatures. So I think Unesh likely to be popular in Mono Blue Sphinx Commander. How popular Mono Blue Sphinx Commander will be, I'm not sure. I think most Sphinx decks reach into other colors, but if you want to be Mono Blue, Unesh is the way to go. As far as Standard, I don't imagine it beats out Torrential Gearhulk as the finisher in control decks. Maybe we can do a sweet budget Mono Blue Sphinx deck that would probably be a ton of fun, but as far as being a tier deck, not really sure. So Unesh, super sweet. We'll have to see where it actually shows up though as far as competitive Magic, if it does at all. Next on our list, we have Hostile Desert, and Hostile Desert is super exciting. It is a colorless creature land, so we gotta pay 2 and exile land from our graveyard, and it becomes a 3/4 elemental until end of turn. So there's kind of a big cost to this. 2 mana is super nice. It's super cheap. It comes into play untapped, which is an upside. I think every other creature land, well, I guess Mutavault doesn't. Most other creature lands come into play tapped, so there is some benefit to being able to use Hostile Desert 4 mana right away, and then a 3/4 body isn't bad. The question in Standard is going to be, how do we actually fuel the lands in our graveyard? We have Evolving Wilds, we have cycling lands, and maybe a deck like Green-Black Delirium can use Vessels and Grapple with the Past and stuff like that to get lands in the graveyard. But it is a real concern. You can't just play this in any deck because most decks don't really have a consistent way of getting lands in the graveyard. However, there is also the possibility that all the good colorless lands we've been seeing, and we've seen other good deserts as well, could bring about a resurgence in an Eldrazi deck in the last couple months leading up to rotation. Eldrazi used to be so good in Standard, but they've kind of faded away because the mana base got so bad. Losing the Pain lands was super impactful for zombies in Standard, but now with stuff like Hostile Desert, some of the other deserts, we might have enough good colorless lands to push Eldrazi back towards the top of the format. Also worth mentioning, Hostile Desert is super easy to turn on in Modern. Question's going to be, do you play this over like a Mutavault or something? But the ability to just sack a fetch land and use the fetch land as fuel for your Hostile Desert to turn it into a 3/4 for only 2 mana is pretty effective. I think it's much bigger than Mutavault, and it's actually not that much more expensive to turn on if you're naturally playing a bunch of fetch lands, so I think there might be a shot that we see Hostile Desert showing up in certain builds in Modern, just because the body's nice and the cost is super low if you have fetch lands to exile every turn. Moving on our list, we have Angel of Condemnation, and this card is super spicy. 4 mana, you get a 3/3 flyer with Vigilance, you can pay 2 and a white, exile another creature until end of turn, basically flicker it, or you can play 2 and a white and exert, and you exile a creature until it leaves battlefield. So the sweet thing about this card is you can use it like an Eldrazi Displacer, but you can also use it as a more permanent removal spell, keeping a creature off the battlefield forever. Also, Vigilance is a big upside, because it means you can attack with Angel of Condemnation. After attacks, you can tap it and flicker a flying blocker, for example, and you're still attacking even though you are tapped to get in that damage. You can flicker your own stuff for value, and also the removal ability is nice. The problem is that Angel of Condemnation is a 4 mana card that dies to a lot of removal that's popular in the format. Gonna die to Harness Lightning and Grasp of Darkness every single time. Also dies to Fatal Push with Revolt, so that's the question. And unlike Eldrazi Displacer, no matter how much mana you have, you can't activate Angel of Condemnation right away. You gotta wait for it to untap, to lose its summoning sickness. So it's like a slow version of Eldrazi Displacer, with the upside of being a flyer, so it can get in damage, and having arguably a more powerful blinking ability, so we'll have to see where this falls. Eldrazi Displacer, like the rest of the Eldrazi we were talking about, was popular when we had Pain lands, and Angel of Condemnation gets around the Pain land problem because you don't need to have colorless mana. You can activate it with white mana, so we'll see. Right now, 4 mana means Gideon, you're getting up near Archangel Avacyn, some really powerful cards, but some of those cards are going to be leaving at rotation, and maybe Angel of Condemnation can fill in the blink slot in post-rotation Standard. Next up, we have Driven to Despair, and this card is super hard to evaluate. First off, I should say, I'm super happy just because we're seeing more efficiently costed Aftermath spells. So many of the Aftermath spells in Amonkhet just felt so overcosted and unplayable, but at 2 mana, Driven, and 2 more mana for Despair, this card is actually pretty push. So, top half gives all your creatures trample, also makes it so when it deals combat damage, you draw a card. And then in the bottom half, you're able to make your opponent discard a card whenever one of your creatures deal damage. So you can do both of these for only 4 mana. I think the big question with Driven to Despair, as far as Standard, is where do you play it? It doesn't seem like it fits in the known green-black decks. If you look at green-black Delirium, green-black Energy, they're not really going wide, and I think that's where this card really shines, is when you're going wide with a bunch of creatures, not going tall with a big Grimflayer, Verdurous Gearhulk stuff. So you want to be going wide, but I think there's possibilities that we could see this work. We could see it in a green-white tokens deck. We could also see it in a black-green Sacrifice Aristocrat style deck. Works super well with stuff like Weaponcraft Enthusiast, Catacomb Sifter, Marionette Master, things where you can put a bunch of tokens on the battlefield, and then cast one or both halves, and potentially the card advantage swing is super massive. Like, it's very easy, if you go wide with tokens, to have Driven to Despair be you draw 3 or 4 or 5 cards while your opponent discards their hand for only 4 mana, and that's an absurdly powerful effect. So the question's going to be, do we have a green-black deck that can support it? But I think if we have a go-wide green-black deck, some token deck, or something similar, Driven to Despair has a chance in Standard, and obviously super strong in Limited. So Hour of Glory is our god removal. Exiles a creature at instant speed. If it's a god, you get to look at your opponent's hand and grab the gods out of your opponent's hand. So worth noting, this doesn't get rid of all the gods in your opponent's deck, or their graveyard, or anything like that. It's just the hand. This card is kind of the black version of Cast Out in some way, except it's way more limited, because it only hits creatures. As 4 mana instant speed removal that deals with anything, there are some similarities there. The fact that it's a worse Cast Out in most situations is a concern about Hour of Glory seeing play. I think the big question is, how good are the gods in Amonkhet Standard? If we are seeing gods taking over the format, the Locust God, the Scorpion God, Aketra, all the gods from Amonkhet, Ronas, all those things, if we're seeing decks that are built around the gods and playing them as 4-ofs and they're very powerful, I could see Hour of Glory being like a 1-of removal spell. It also has a bit of additional upside against indestructible stuff. It is a Gideon Answer. It gets rid of an Ormondal that flips around. It gets rid of an Ulamog. A lot of this stuff is rotating in the fall, but for the next 3 months, it is a clean answer to all of these effects. So based on all this, I could see it showing up as like a 1-of, maybe a 2-of, but I don't think much more than that because it's so expensive. So wrapping up today, we have our Planeswalker deck cards. So the new cards from the Planeswalker decks, they are legal in Standard, but they will not be in Hour of Devastation booster packs, and not much to see here. We have stuff that cares about Nicol Bolas or Nissa. So the Nicol Bolas card, Zealot of the God Pharaoh, limited fodder if it was in the set. Wasp of the Bitter End is one of the better ones. A 2/1 flyer isn't bad. I could see playing this in Commander. You get to kill something when you cast a Bolas Planeswalker. And Visage of Bolas helps you ramp into Bolas, also tutor for Bolas, but only the Planeswalker deck Bolas. You can't search up real Bolas with it. And the Nissa cards, Nissa's Encouragement, does a little bit of tutoring for Nissa, or a land, or a Bramblewood Behemoth, which is just a 6/6 for 6. It's big, new players will like it, dies to removal though. And then Avid Reclaimer is interesting ramp, but we have better, cheaper options available in Standard, so I don't think any of these cards will actually see play, but they will make the new Planeswalker deck featuring Nissa and Nicol Bolas a little more flavorful, a little more exciting. Anyway, that's our daily Amonkhet spoilers for today. So what do you think? How good is the god removal? Can we make Sphinx tribal in Standard? What cards are you most excited about? What about the new Desert Land? Is that modern playable? Can it be played in Standard? How are we going to get lands in our graveyard? Let me know in the comments. As always, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.